Well, welcome everyone to the Atlanta Science Festival Science and Spirituality panel, Cosmic Theology. My name is Reverend Daniel Brower. I am the Associate Pastor of First Christian Church of Decatur. And on behalf of First Christian Church of Decatur, I would like to welcome you to our humble abode. First Christian Church of Decatur has been home to the Atlanta Science Festival's office for several years now. And when they started renting space from us, my predecessor, Reverend Dr. James Brewer Calvert, was like, how can we work together? How can we make this partnership rather than just an arrangement? And so the Science and Spirituality panel was born. This is going to be the first year that Pastor James is not with us. We lost him to cancer this past July. But in his honor and memory, his legacy persists in so many ways, including this one. So I am incredibly honored to be on this panel this year, along with my incredible co-panelists. Joining me are the Reverend Maressa Pendermon of Unity Fellowship Greater Atlanta, Jordan Mckaig, a PhD candidate of astrobiology from Georgia Tech, Reverend Paul Turner of Gentle Spirit Christian Church, and the Reverend Dr. Lucas Mix, phoning in from England, the United Kingdom.
Amen.
We are looking forward to having a great conversation with you tonight. We are live streaming this, so hello to everyone online. We are also recording this, so hello to everyone on the recording. And hopefully, we're looking forward to having a great panel. Thank you all so much for being here, and we look forward to talking with you. Oh, one more thing. Two more things. Sorry. Restrooms are straight out this door. And also, we will be taking questions in the second half of the panel. So if you have any questions, ideas, anything that arises, we have index cards at the front of the sanctuary back there. And we ask that you just write down your question, and we'll collect those about halfway through and talk about whatever you want to talk about. Okay, and that's the last thing.
That's cool.
Yeah.
Well, again, thank you for being here. This is an exciting thing. I think the topic is more than just a little exciting. We decided that I would serve as the moderator tonight so that all of these folks could talk and really give you the stuff that matters. And it's really the way to shut me up, except at the beginning. Because I'm going to give you a little bit of an introduction. And somehow I can't think that this is probably the way Pastor James would have wanted it. He's not here to keep me quiet. But I am so excited by the panel. We have a wide diversity of not only faith, but science venue, and that's not what I want. The word I want, discipline, is the word I want, disciplines. So I think the conversation will be exciting. I hope that it triggers your imagination and your thought process, and you feel free to write down your questions or the thoughts. And the one thing I will say, so you know, there is no silly question. There is no dumb question when it comes to this, because quite frankly, most of us, with the exception of the scientists that are sitting here, really don't have a whole lot of knowledge about what's out there. And so we have that opportunity. So let me give you this statement and then we will move on. This event is especially designed for adults that are interested in an exciting nexus between science and spirituality. I think sometimes we don't know how much our spirituality intersects with science. The content that we discuss tonight is aimed to engage a broad audience, broad thoughts, broad conversation, as wide as we can possibly make it. Science and spiritual enthusiasts, those that are intrigued by the mysteries of the cosmos and the philosophical and theological questions that may be invoked. We will probably hear some of that conversation. Lifelong learners, people that just want to learn. And then this is a good panel to be a part of, to listen to ideas and to hear thoughts and to see what's going on as far as exploration. And then for general community members, individuals that are looking for meaningful conversations and connections around topics that actually bridge the science and theology and spirituality. We hope to effectively engage you folks, as our content will emphasize the inclusive and open-minded approach to dialogue. This is incredibly important for each one of the panelists, for everybody to know here that this is wide open. There is no particular theological or denominational uh, push from the spiritual side, and that is also true of the science discipline as well. This is to invoke the time that you can learn and discuss and explore. And with that, I want to turn you over to the first scientist of the evening, and that would be Jordan.
Awesome, thank you. Yeah, so just before we get started with the panel discussion, I wanted to give a quick overview of the scientific scope of astrobiology, just so people are kind of on the same page of what we're talking about tonight. So let me get these slides up and running. There she goes. Okay. There we go.
There we
Okay,
go.
great. Yeah, so Astrobiology 101. So this is a really cool mural that's on the wall at NASA Ames Research Center, which is in the Bay Area of California. And it's basically, there's a lot going on, obviously, but this is just how I kind of wanted to start off these slides. It shows a lot about kind of like different theories for the potential origin of life and like the distribution of life in the universe. So we've got, comets with infall of things from space coming to this planet. We have volcanoes. There's all these like crazy little things going on in the ocean and living things on Earth. My research particularly focuses mostly on these little microbes in this ocean, but that's a story for another day. Just kind of wanted to have that to set the stage. So astrobiology is broadly defined as the study of life in the universe, and this can be broken down into a few main questions. The first being, what is life? The second, where is life? And the third, where is life going? So all of these questions can be broken down into further sub-questions. I just listed a few examples here. So for what is life, how do we define life? Like if we actually found something interesting in space exploration, how would we be able to decide if it's living or not? How did life form? How did life begin on Earth? So we kind of have some ideas what early Earth conditions were like, but unfortunately the time machine is not ready yet, so we can't exactly go back and check ourselves. So there's a lot of researchers who are doing a lot of different things to kind of try to synthesize those early building blocks of life under laboratory conditions. Similarly, has life arisen everywhere else or anywhere else, excuse me? And so do we also think that the right conditions for life to arise, do those exist elsewhere in our solar system or maybe somewhere outside of our solar system? Finally, is it easy or hard for life to originate? I have a professor, I'm taking a class right now about the origin of life, and he is more of the idea that it's actually pretty easy for life to form, and he thinks that maybe life formed multiple times on Earth, and we're just seeing what kind of stuck around. So for where is life, we want to also understand, like, okay, we know life is existing here on Earth, so that's a good place to check out. How does life survive in the most extreme conditions here? So some people who do astrobiology might look at like very deep places in the ocean or like kind of the land around volcanoes where it's super hot and toxic, or maybe like super deep underground where the sun will never like reach and be able to actually power life, where chemical reactions instead are what powers microbes down there. So kind of understanding how life survives in those super extreme conditions can help us understand expand our understanding of how life could be living on other planets and moons in our solar system or beyond. Similarly to that, everyone wants to know if there's life on Mars, is there life anywhere else? There have been a lot of different interplanetary missions that have gone to these planets and moons and tried to learn more about whether or not we think that the right conditions for life are there, and also looking for some of those signatures. And then also, how can we search for signs of extraterrestrial life? If it's within our solar system, we're probably going to be looking for microbes, so something like a bacteria. Very difficult to see, like we can't see it with our eyes. We need very sophisticated technology here on Earth. And so there's a lot of open questions about how to actually turn that into doing life detection on other planets and moons. Finally, where is life going? So can life forms be transmitted between celestial bodies? Is it possible that things like asteroids and comets could actually spread microbes from one planet to another? What is the future of life on Earth? So again, we have life here, but will life always be on this planet? We don't know. And we don't know how long this planet will be able to actually support life forms. And then finally, what is the future of Terran or from Earth life in our solar system? So if people decide to try to establish settlements on other planets and moons, what will that look like? So that was a lot of words. I'm just going to kind of break these down with some nice pictures. So once again, what is life? We have a lot of different definitions and we haven't totally decided on something that works well. The NASA definition, and this is really wordy, so I apologize, but it is a self-sustaining chemical system capable of Darwinian evolution, which basically means, yeah, which basically means you have something happening chemically and it's able to kind of change over time as environmental conditions change. Another definition has more qualities that we can actually, begin to conceptualize. So they define it as any system capable of doing things like eating, metabolizing, excreting, breathing, moving, growing, reproducing, and responding to external stimuli. So again, this could be a lot of different things, and it kind of gets confusing when we start to look at these very unique systems. Like there's even certain things on Earth that people will still have discussions about whether or not they're alive. For example, viruses. How does life form? Once again, we don't know. Somehow on the early Earth, there were a bunch of molecules, and then at some point they started to do things that looked like life, and now we are all here. And like I said, there are so many different theories for it that I'm not going to get into today, but people have questions. And again, we don't know how often this happens. This might be something that's pretty easy to happen under the right conditions, or it's possible that it's super unique and we are like even more of a serendipitous occurrence than one might think. Where are we looking for life? So within our own solar system, we're looking for probably most famously life on Mars. Mars today is a desert planet. It's very dry. It's very cold. There's a lot of UV radiation from the sun. It doesn't have a good atmosphere to protect it. It's not a good place to live unless you had a lot of protection from a spacecraft or a spacesuit. And even then, your life would be very hard on Mars. However, we think that in its very distant past, Mars actually looked more similar to what Earth looks like today. So we think that it had water on the surface and lakes and oceans and maybe a more sophisticated atmosphere. And actually, so the amount of time that we think it took life to arise on Earth, Mars was habitable. So it had the right conditions for life for much longer than it took for life to arise on Earth. So that makes some people think that maybe life actually started on Mars and then was somehow transported to Earth where it kind of found a better home. Another place we're looking for life, and one of my favorites is Enceladus, which is a moon of Saturn. We're not really thinking so much about potential life on places like Saturn or Jupiter, but they have so many moons that have these really interesting environmental conditions. So Enceladus is pretty small as far as moons go. I think it's about like 500-kilometer radius. And it has a subsurface ocean. So it has this really thick ice shell. And underneath it, we know that there is the subsurface ocean that actually has some of those building blocks for life. So the only reason we know that is a spacecraft was able to fly through basically like a jet of material from that subsurface ocean. And they were able to see that things like the elements that you would need for life and some very basic building blocks of life forms actually do exist on Enceladus. So that's just one example of places we're looking in our own solar system. In terms of exoplanets outside of our solar system, so the sun is not the only star that has its own planets. As of March 7th of this year, there were 5,595 confirmed exoplanets. So this is just kind of some graphics showing just the scale. There's so many planets detected.
So much for Let There Be Light.
Yeah, right. And we have some artist renditions here of just some ideas what these exoplanets could look like, but we're really in like the early days of actually understanding what exoplanets are, how we can detect them, and how we can learn more about them. And with every day, we're discovering more and more of these. So that just has some really exciting potential for like what could be there outside of our own solar system. Finally, where is life going? So as I alluded to earlier, some people are wondering about whether or not life could be transmitted between different planets. And I think that's something that will probably be of relevance for our discussion tonight. Like what if we actually did find some compelling evidence that suggests that we are descended from Martians and Earth wasn't our home this whole time? And then similarly, it's possible that things like comets and asteroids could also transport around the building blocks of life and also living things themselves. Next, so this is a kind of wordy slide, but this is just an interest that I like to talk about a lot. So we know that when we are sending rovers to other planets and moons and celestial bodies within our solar system, they are not completely clean. There is bacteria everywhere on everything. It's all over the place on Earth. Humans are basically walking bags of microbes. And wherever we go, even if we're just sending a robot, our microbes are going along with it. So the Curiosity rover, which landed on Mars in 2012, had about, I think, 60,000 bacteria on it. And that was just the estimate. So like, is there life on Mars? Yes. And it's our own just microbes.
We did it.
We did it. We put life on Mars. Good job, everyone. We can all go home. But that does beg some important questions about like, how we're actually playing a role in this distribution of life throughout the universe. And then also there's questions about what if there is life on Mars and maybe we're kind of forcing it out of the way, like with our own life form, or maybe they would coexist, or maybe, you know, we would never actually be able to know there was life on Mars because maybe signals from our own contamination was so vast that it totally obscured what we'd be able to see about life on Mars. So this just kind of, it brings up a lot of questions, and there's a lot of people in the field of planetary protection, is what this field is called, that have a lot of ideas about kind of what this means for colonial implications of space exploration, and a lot of stuff, just like the future of this field. Finally, what is the future of life on Earth? So we sent a few very lucky people to the moon, but no one's really gone much farther than that so far. But NASA does hope to send people back to the moon within the next decade, and in the coming decades, humans to Mars as well. And the idea would be, with this lunar exploration, hopefully people would be sticking around. So there'll be, you know, hopefully people on the moon in settlements that are there for months, years, maybe even for the rest of their lives, with similar hopes for Mars. So again, this will just kind of bring up some more questions about what's going on with our own planet, under the face of climate change and things like that, and thinking about, like, you know, where our spread throughout the solar system is and what that might mean for civilization and ethics and religion. And that's all I have. But thanks, everyone.
Wow.
Thank you, George.
Okay, we're just gonna go straight to the audience questions. But I will say this, that you made me think that the prime directive is already shot.
Well, yeah, maybe. Worry about that.
All right. So we have 4 questions for the panel, and we didn't talk about this before. I don't want to sit here and call on folks. So when we ask these questions, we're just going to go around the room. Every panelist will answer or try to answer the question as best you can. And in this first round of questions, if you want to give a little introduction about how you came to this panel and what you do for your living and those kinds of things, that would be a welcome piece. Okay. All righty. So here we go. This first question, I would like to invite you to explore how recent astrobiological discoveries, such as what was being talked about, challenge, expand, and affirm traditional religious understandings of creation and human significance. So, folks, how does the discovery of potential habitable exoplanets influence religious narratives about creation and humanity's uniqueness in the universe? And since it's only fair that we reach across the ocean to start, whoop.
My name is Lucas Mix. I have a doctorate in evolutionary theory from Harvard, where I studied the early development of photosynthesis on Earth, which got me into astrobiology. For the last 25 years, I have been facilitating discussion at NASA and elsewhere on how people from different disciplines can talk to each other about astrobiology. But I also work getting people to talk about science and religion. So I love this particular question. In my mind, there's this idea that we are earthlings. It's a wonderful word, earthling. And some of you may know that in the Bible, there's this word Adam, which also means earthling or grounding. That God called the first human Adam because they were made from the earth. And so for me, astrobiology is really an opportunity to ask how we fit into the ground around us and the space around us. And so I think it reinforces this idea that we are of the earth, but also challenges us, like Christianity, to think about what might it be to be alive elsewhere, and how can we reach beyond, and what will we carry with us? And I don't think there's easy answers. So I like those questions, and I like having science and theology as ways into them.
Yeah. Marissa.
I like Luke's answer.
Yeah, that's my thing. Like, he's gonna say all the good stuff.
Hello, my name is Reverend Maressa Pendermon. I am a pastor and a chaplain. Come to this panel because of my primarily because of my work in chaplaincy. I particularly work in hospice, and so I journey with people toward the end of life. And I work as a part of interdisciplinary teams, most of whom are scientists and scientifically trained. Um, and I have a Master of Divinity from Cambridge School of Theology. Um, and I'm also a recovering attorney. I was a lawyer in a former life. So all of those things um, sort of bring me to this place. Um, I, I think in terms of that particular question, um, it causes me to think about whether or not we have some arrogance as earthlings.
Mm-hmm.
Even as we sit in conversations about ethics around end of life issues, around how people live a good life and die a good death. It begs the question around where life begins and where it ends. And I think we're going to talk about that a little bit. And I think we assume, even as we approach the subject of astrobiology, we assume that if and when we find life somewhere else other than planet Earth, that life will be less intelligent than we are. I think it's a bad assumption to make. And I think our ethical responsibility is to proclaim and proceed as if all living things are sacred. Wherever we find them, wherever they grow, wherever they're sustained, that they are sacred. And it would be nice if we just approach each other as sacred here as earthlings as well. So I lost track of where I was supposed to end, so I'll end there.
Okay, that was great.
Preach on, preach.
Where do we? Go ahead.
Yeah, absolutely. So, hi everyone. My name is Jordan. As previously stated, I'm working on a PhD in astrobiology at Georgia Tech. And I got into this particularly because I'm involved with a group on Georgia Tech's campus that is just kind of interested on making a community for people who are studying space and planetary science and origins of life and astrobiology and all of that stuff. And so I got an email from someone at Atlanta Science Festival asking if I want to be involved in this. And absolutely, I was like, I want this to happen. I want to do whatever I can to be involved in this. So I think it's really important to be having these discussions. I think sometimes people like to set up science and religion as things that are opposing each other, which is, I think, really unfortunate, and it does a disservice to both fields because, you know, we're grappling with similar questions between science and religion, but at the end of the day, the tools are fundamentally different and the approaches are fundamentally different. So I like to think of it as multiple lenses of kind of understanding what's going on around us. In terms of the question, I think thinking about exoplanets, I really want to echo what you said about humans being kind of egocentric or arrogant and thinking that like we must be the only thing because this is the only thing we're seeing. I think, you know, as we continue to advance technology, we're only going to learn more and more things that are probably going to challenge our, you know, what we thought was happening before. And that just means we're learning and we're making discoveries. And I think that like as we're starting to see more about these exoplanets and we start to kind of get those first glimpses of data that show us that not only are there other planets, but there are planets that don't look too different from ours, like things with water and the same gases that we have here in our atmosphere. So yeah, that's kind of what I have to say on that. And then I had one other thing I wanted to say about this was just kind of thinking about the, you know, self facingness of humans. I think if we find life somewhere else in our solar system, it'll be very interesting to kind of try to figure out if it seems to be related to life here on Earth. So does it have DNA and proteins and all those other things that we kind of know make up our fundamental biology, or could it be something totally different? So I have not seen Star Trek, as we talked about earlier, but I know in Star Trek they discuss like silicon-based life forms instead of carbon-based life forms. So that's just one example of life like not as we know it. And I think if we ever make any discoveries about life like that are not like our own biology, I think that's going to really shake up a lot of minds about these types of topics.
Well, and it's man, I've always been afraid ever since E.T. That's what really caught me was I wanted to meet E.T. But I've been scared to death that we're going to have a visitor from some other planet and we're going to kill him and dissect him.
Well,
Just on the basis of what Reverend Marissa was talking about in our arrogance, and this whole Earth idea, which leads to you to kind of wrap up this first question.
oh man. Well, my name is Daniel Brower. I'm again the associate pastor of First Christian Decatur. I'm also a chaplain in the Georgia Army National Guard, so I'm also coming at this from a chaplaincy perspective a little bit. But I'm also coming at this from the perspective of a lifelong sci-fi fan. So I think I might be the most well-versed in Star Trek at this table. Um, don't at me. I don't know. But in thinking about how the potential for life beyond this planet affects our religious sensibilities, you got to think about how often, I'm going to speak from a uniquely Christian standpoint, as that's my faith tradition. How many times has Christianity changed its mind in 2000 years? I was trying to explain this to my husband, and I said, back in the day, people used to think that the Bible said that the earth revolves around the sun. And he was like, well, it does. I was like, all right. But the Bible used to be very clear the sun revolves around the earth. The Bible used to be very clear that women are the inferior sex. The Bible used to be very clear about a lot of things that we now know are not true. So you encounter people who are like, if there is extraterrestrial life, then it completely invalidates Christianity because that means the Bible is wrong. This happened before. It will shake up a lot of things. If we find that there is a potential for life outside of our planet, if we find that that potential is realized in life outside of our planet, it's going to be a shakeup. It's going to change everything that we know. But it does not diminish our tradition. It does not diminish our religion or our spirituality. Or it won't if we let it. It can instead expand what we view as sacred, what we view as life, what we view as part of ourselves, how we fit into the universe. So it has the potential to be really interesting and really life-changing if we let it.
Emphasis on if.
If. Big if.
All depends on what the word if means. Okay, well, that leads into the second question, actually, for you all to consider. And that is, can astrobiology and the search for extraterrestrial intelligence provide new metaphors or insights for spirituality and the theological reflections? And you were kind of moving in that direction, so why don't you just continue?
Keep on rolling.
Go around the table.
I mean, absolutely. It can expand the ways that we think about our spirituality and our place in the universe. My touch point for this particular series of questions is always C.S. Lewis's Space Trilogy. I've read all three of them. I only remember the plot of the first one. But in the first book, a man goes to Mars and he meets Martians. And he says, "Why didn't God tell us you were here?" And the Martians say, "Why would God do that? Why do you think you're the main character?" So it gives us new imagination and new insights on how we view ourselves, how we view what our stories mean to us. You know, what does Jesus mean to a Martian? And in that, what does that change about what Jesus means for us? There are, it just opens up a world of theoretical and practical possibilities that are really interesting to contemplate. So, yes, astrobiology and the search for extraterrestrial intelligence provides a wealth of new metaphors and insights for creative minds such as ours to explore with people.
Brother Luke,
I guess I'm going to start with Ecclesiastes here. Vanity, vanity, all is vanity, and there is no new thing under the sun.
What
I
about
have,
under Kepler, though?
I have that's a good point. I think the Bible's bigger than most of us usually remember. And there's lots of stories in there. One of the ones that sticks out for me is we often hear people say, "What is man that thou art mindful of him? He is little lower than the angels." And they forget there's another psalm that says, "What is man that thou art mindful of him? He is like the grass of the field and passes away." So we have these stories about human importance, but we also have stories from Job where we hear all about the things God is doing that have absolutely nothing to do with us. And astrobiology, I find wonderful because it gets me out of myself and I can think about all of these things God is doing in the universe that have nothing to do with me. And I can go out there and say, wow, God is doing something that I don't know about yet. Maybe it's worth my finding out. Maybe if I go chasing, I will find God, the hem of God's garment having passed by, and really discover something new about myself and God and my neighbor. And I just get joyful every time that happens. So that's my answer.
I'm going to change this a little bit for you, Marissa.
Oh boy.
Well, because what Luke said made me think, in what you were saying, in the arrogancy, if you will. It's probably not a question of whether astrobiology and the search for intelligence will provide new metaphors. But what kind of metaphors are we going to get?
Oh my. I don't know. I don't know what the metaphors would be. I think um I think that there is this tendency um to look for metaphors in both religion and science. Um and I think they are both bigger than anything we can call them or compare them to. And so we keep looking and the metaphors keep changing and sometimes expanding. Um, so I don't know what we will get when we lean into the notion that there is something other than us. Um, I hope it will be surprising because I think that we've uh, settled into this life in a way that it's hard for most of us to be surprised. And I hope that we would be surprised by whatever new metaphors would come about. But I don't know what they would be.
See, and this is just gonna get harder for you.
Oh, great.
Because, well, y'all are making me think. I mean, because she said that in honest folks, the, the first thought that I had when Reverend Marissa started talking is, we can't get along with people of color.
Mm.
So what are we gonna do with somebody or something, or however that's defined? What are we doing with that?
Yeah, so I mean, so what you were saying a second ago about the Martians and like
Yeah.
why would they tell you? Like I think I really do think like there is just so there's like if we find anything that is like life unlike what we understand here on Earth, like we're just not going to know what to do with it. Like it's going to be very, difficult to try to figure out like kind of squaring away what it means with our own understanding of life and everything. And also just going back to the concept of intelligence. Like people often, like to think that humans are the most intelligent creatures on this planet. And that might not necessarily be true. Like there are, dolphins, for example, are highly intelligent and, in ways that we might actually understand, or even microbes, like, I'm like my microbiology expertise is showing right now, but like there are so many microbes and they can do so many interesting things that like humans could never even think of doing, like in terms of just rapidly changing to environmental conditions or kind of like forming these, really intricate chemical signaling to kind of talk to each other. Like that in itself is a form of intelligence. And that's something that in the terms of like ethics around living things, like no one's speaking up for like saving the microbes. Like, you could be in the lab and you put some bleach on them and then you go home. And I just, yeah, I don't know. I think it's like whatever is going to be out there that we encounter, it's going to be really interesting and difficult to kind of square it with our understanding of what's going on here.
I hope you're writing questions down. I keep coming up with questions and I'm forgetting them as I go along. But let's go to our next one. Is there a role? I'm going to start with the pastors, the two pastors. Is there a role for spirituality and religious tradition in guiding the ethical decisions? And I think I probably want to reword that. I don't think that we want to be making ethical decisions as maybe ethical questions. As to humanity, as we step forward into this. I thought Jordan brought up something interesting when she talked about all the microbes on the
Curiosity.
on that machine that we've put on Mars, that we've already screwed up their environment if there is life there, which means they may be pissed off at us if it turns out that there's a way to communicate. So come with me here. How do you get there? How do those decisions get made?
Oh man. I think that religion and spirituality definitely have a role to play because the way that a person of faith, I'm going to put my foot in my mouth here in a minute. The way that a person of faith conceptualizes life and the way that a person of science conceptualizes life may be very different. Again, I'm going to put my foot in my mouth with Lucas specifically, who is representing both camps right now. um, but like Jordan said in her introduction, what is life anyway? Like, where do we consider that it begins? When do we start caring about what life is? When do we start giving that life the agency to self-determinate? How do you ask a microbe, do you want to go to space? Is it then ethical to send a microbe to space if you can't get an answer? What does it matter? Does it matter? And I think that there is wisdom in religious and spiritual traditions that can inform those decisions. I don't know that religious and spiritual authorities should be making those decisions, but I think that there is a lot that we can contribute to the conversation as this field continues to develop. Reverend Maressa, what do you think?
I definitely think that there is something to contribute. I think that spirituality gets conflated with religion. And I think in particular when we're talking about ethics, we have to unpack them a bit and think about spirituality in a broader sense. Like what is meaning making? And I think a lot of times when we are informing decisions about humanity and etc., we forget to think about what gives one's life meaning from their perspective. And occasionally I'm asked to sit on an ethics panel because someone is unable to speak or is in a state and the scientists are talking about life and possibility for recovery and cure and those kinds of things. And I'm always thinking that cure is not the same thing as healing.
Yeah.
And that what are those possibilities for healing and for life to have meaning as the person, as the living thing that we're talking about sees it. You know, what does meaning mean to them? And are they still able to ascertain that or to even know if it's happening or not? And so there are things in the Christian tradition and other religious traditions that can inform those decisions, but I think we have to broaden our thinking about what does it mean to invoke spirituality.
Luke, you have your feet on both sides of this. So where's the third rail?
Aren't we supposed to avoid touching the third rail?
Well,
So,
you would think.
No, thank you, Reverend Maressa. I really appreciated that. I think we fall into the trap of assuming that all problems are knowledge problems and that if we're just smart enough and well-informed enough, we'll deal with them the right way. And one of the important things that chaplains do is both model and sort of give us space to make decisions with our hearts. And I think that's tremendously important. And I think it's important for science too, that it's not just a mental activity, it's a community activity, it's curiosity, it's joy. And so I think that Christians certainly can offer this living in the world, not just with our heads, but with our whole selves.
You want to add on? Or...
I think it's all been said, honestly.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, and just off the track a little bit, I'm wondering, would you all agree with this statement that one of the challenges that we have is the fact that in this Bible that has all this stuff in it, even if you haven't looked at the Bible in a long time, you know the creation story where it says that God gave us humans dominion over everything. And does that become part of the challenge in finding life someplace else? I mean, because there's part of it, what you said earlier, that's been just kicking around in my head, that is like, who the hell are we to define life? I mean, um, if it's not us, does that mean it's not life? Take that and run with it for a minute.
Hmm. I keep thinking about one of our early conversations about this panel. I think it was like the first conversation we had with Lucas. Is he made the statement that if we find life outside of this planet, it's probably going to be lichen, not like us.
Yeah.
And I have not stopped thinking about that
Right.
since. Partially because it's clever and partially because it's true. Um, and and then we get back to, you know, how much do we care about things that aren't like us? And what does dominion mean? Does it mean conquering or does it mean caring? Somebody else talk.
Anybody else want to jump in on that? Since that wasn't part of my original question.
If I might be forgiven for another clever remark, I like to tell people that God told us to be fruitful and multiply and cover the face of the earth, and we've done that. And so it's I think it's an invitation to think about, whether other Earth is Earth. There's a difference between ground and the planet.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know. I honestly don't know. Or I mean, I don't even have a strong opinion about whether God calls us to be elsewhere.
Yeah.
And I think the question itself is enough to give us pause.
And it brings us back to at the beginning of Lent, and when we do the whole act thing, from dust you'll come and to dust you'll return. It brings up, folks, a whole new way of having to reflect on that. And especially if we're going to continue to get nosy and look through microscopes and telescopes out into the universe. All right, well, we're going to wrap this up with this last question, and then we're going to take questions from you all. So if you've written questions down on those cards, if somebody could get those cards and get up to us.
For us.
And here we go. Last question of the night for the panelists, other than what comes from the audience. How can the dialogue between astrobiology and theology inform and enrich humanity's understanding of its purpose, and maybe more importantly, our place in the universe? Go ahead, Luke.
Lucas, run with it.
Um, from my time in studying photosynthesis, we're in a very interesting place where the primary output of the sun is a wavelength of light, which is optimal for changing chemical bonds. It's interesting. You have stars that are more energetic and they break up chemicals, and less energetic and they don't do anything, which means that in some ways we're tuned to our environment. And we think that our environment is tuned to us. And so astrobiology has given me the opportunity to flip that perspective.
I think the gift of the two is that it reminds me that we live in an either-or world, and that it really is both that. In that that we get to be complemented by science. We who are religious and lean into religion get to be complemented and accompanied by science, and scientists get to be complemented and accompanied by religion. And there are a lot of things that we make binary in the world that we don't have to, and we may be better served if we didn't. And so, yeah.
Sure.
Yeah, Yeah, I think that this complement between science and religion and spirituality is just like a really awesome thing to kind of put in juxtaposition to each other and to kind of help enhance understandings of each other. And like I think another cool example of like kind of how the meanings can intertwine is on Earth, we are at a good position from the sun where it's not so far away that we don't have enough sunlight to like sustain energy or sustain life and all that. But it's also not so close that, we end up like Venus and there's this really intense greenhouse gas thing going on where if there is life on Venus, and again, that's a story for another day, it would look absolutely nothing like what we have here on Earth. And I think like in that, it's kind of hard to not feel this sense of like wonder and awe of like we happen to be on the planet where this is all, kind of working out in a way that life can be here. And of course, that's a likely thing for someone to say from a place where like life was able to evolve. But it's like it's cool because like you can have that sort of phenomenon and then through spirituality and religion that can help you derive meaning from it and start to think more about like, okay, so we're here, now what?
You get the last word, Rev.
Oh yeah, okay then. Um, so this past Sunday at my congregation, the message was brought by a retired psychotherapist who spoke about how his discipline interacted with his faith. And my comment about it after the fact was psychotherapy has as much to do with your faith as you let it. And that I think applies to basically every discipline. Every new thing that you learn, for me, I'm gonna speak personally. Every new thing that I learn, every new discipline that enters my sphere of knowledge deepens and enriches my faith in ways that I would never have thought of until I learned about it. The idea that we are not alone in the universe, the idea that we are not unique in God's creation. How long have we been talking about this panel? Like 2 months, 3 months?
Something like that.
Even in those 3 months, it has changed the way I look at the world and changed my faith in a way that is going to continue the more that I learn about astrobiology from people like Jordan and Lucas. Every new thing enriches and deepens our understanding of faith. And I think that's really beautiful. That's my 3 cents adjusted for inflation.
Amen. Well, I think that the panel has played off of each other wonderfully, don't you? If you do, let them know.
Oh my gosh.
I thought the questions were good. I thought the questions were going to be simple, folks.
I love you
Yeah,
guys.
essays.
Wow.
These are in no particular order, and we're probably not going to get to them all because we want to keep this to about an hour. We'll maybe go a little over that depending on how great these questions are, which they're going to be great. All right, so here we go. This is there's 4 questions on one card, so I'm just going to take the first one. How would we know if an alien species is conscious? Would our answer affect how we intersect or are involved with them? Who wants to take a shot at that?
I can talk about this.
Okay.
Jordan.
So in terms of knowing if it's conscious or not, I guess the only way to know for sure it's conscious is if it tells us. Also like would we say that AI is conscious? And like if you were on like Chat GPT, would it tell you that you're conscious? I don't know, I haven't tried that. So I guess unfortunately, I think knowing whether or not it's conscious would change how humans interact with it. I don't think that that's how it should be, but I think that based on how like humans traditionally are, I think that it probably will matter. And I think people will be more likely to kind of sympathize with something that's more conscious just because we can see ourselves in it, I guess. But yeah, that's what I've got. If anyone else wants to add anything.
Anybody else want to take a shot?
Every answer I have is just more questions. Like if it did tell us that it was conscious, would we understand it? I'm back to the episode of Star Trek is called The Devil in the Dark. And yes, like the rock is telling you it's conscious, but we can't understand it. So we continue to hurt it. Like, I don't know.
That brings up the whole idea of the pet rock.
Not going to talk about
But-
Rocco on the Cosmic Theology channel.
But you all are onto something because communication is big in this, isn't it, Luke? In that sense, because I'm a dog person, right? I have this 13-year-old border collie, obviously doesn't speak human, but certainly makes himself understood. I mean, if he wants to eat, he goes and stands by his dish and will give you a little wolf. If you do not refer to that wolf, it turns into a bark, or when he has to go out, he goes to the door. So I'm wondering, just part of that question is determining consciousness, whether they can communicate.
I think this is a brain heart question that
Oh,
the only thing that determining whether it's conscious can do is give us permission not to love it. And so I'm going to say that the important thing is to start by loving it and then ask whether its communication with you allows you to love it better.
Yes.
we all just been to church.
Talk about it.
Okay, next question. What do theologians around the world say about the possibility of other forms of life in the universe? Man, I don't know. I just know my own local conversations.
There's some good books written on this subject by folks, Ollie Peccavino, Ted Peters, David Wilkinson. Lots of speculation about if we're the only ones fallen, if we're the only ones redeemed, and whether God has a call for us elsewhere. I encourage folks to look into it. And of course, there's great science fiction that does all of those questions, such as The Sparrow by Mary Doria Russell. And the Space Trilogy by C.S. Lewis.
Thank you. Anybody else?
Yeah, he named some of the people. There is a lively discussion among theologians, and you get as many thoughts as you get religious denomination. It's a lot. What's discouraging about it is that a lot of it seems to be grounded in individual dogma. And it stifles the conversation.
If I'm hearing anything from the panel tonight, that's if y'all walk out of here with one thing, in order for this to work, we got to be a whole lot more open than we are now. Is that an agreeable statement? I mean, there's a lot of our bias that we have to set off to the side, a lot of how we think things are supposed to operate, which leads to this question. I saw the Pope's lead astronomer across the street at St. Thomas More, that's the Roman Catholic Church across the street, in 2018, discussing his book, Would You Baptize an Extraterrestrial? Should we consider this if and when we encounter intelligent life? I'm going to let you start with this because you think, well, you were kind of walking that path before.
Would the extraterrestrial want to be baptized? That's the only question.
What makes us think that Martians don't have their own Jesus?
Yeah, like, what, I mean, they might teach us a cool new way to baptize. But yeah, it would just depend on what they would want. For me, at least, I wouldn't even baptize a member of my congregation without,
Right.
conversation. So, let alone an extraterrestrial.
Yeah.
Anybody else want to comment? Luke?
Well, I'll just share that was in fact Brother Guy's answer in the book. He says, if she asked.
There you go.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. Okay. I see. I want it noted that I stayed out of trouble. All right, question. Why can't we marry the concept that God and the solar system coexist and work hand in hand?
Next question, isn't it?
Well, if you're Christian, I, and I think Jewish, I don't know about Hindu and Buddhist, but I mean, didn't God have a hand in the universe? So why wouldn't we coexist?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like we definitely, like, if, kind of when looking at like spheres that are generally like traditionally more contentious with spirituality, I think a lot of it can come down to like, is there any reason to believe that God wouldn't have created this? For example, evolution. Like, evolution can be a real thing that has, led to a lot of biological phenomenon. And it's like, why can't that be a tool for a divine entity to kind of have this role in creating a like more diverse sphere of living things? So I don't know. That's kind of my perspective on it.
It kind of goes back to what Reverend Maressa was saying about why we can't talk about these things. Because the question isn't why doesn't God and the solar system and science and the universe work together? It's why can't we see that they do?
Mm.
And it's because personal opinion time. Individual dogma gets in the way. If I'm not right about the universe, that's very frightening. If I'm not right about God creating and instead everything evolved, what else am I wrong about? And for some people, that's very frightening. That's not an exciting prospect. That's a terrifying prospect. So no, I'm not going to listen to your weird science about microbes. I know where they came from,
Or lichen.
or lichen. So I think it's fear and control that keeps us from having these things in dialogue.
And I need to know. There's something about both religion and science that is mysterious.
Yes.
And we have to know.
Isn't that a human trait?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that humans have got to figure it out. We got to have an answer, do we not?
Mm-hmm.
So, and when we don't have, that's, folks, I think that's when we're at our most dangerous. Because when we can't find answers, we start making it up,
Hallelujah.
which means that some of those metaphors are going to get us in a lot of trouble. All right, I think this last one, this is all we have time for. We're out of time. Last question. It's kind of complicated. I'm going to give it to the scientists first. Pastors, you can jump in if you want. All right, here we go. Since one way we test a hypothesis is to see if it's reproducible, I'm wondering if we created life or seen it spontaneously occurring from non-living parts. If so, can you describe how that worked? What happened to what elements, etc.? If not, what are the implications of the absence of a theory that can be tested and observed? What we were just talking about, wasn't it?
Yeah, I can definitely take a stab at answering this. So the short answer is people are working on it. There are a lot of different studies that are kind of investigating, trying to simulate early Earth conditions that we think were happening around when life formed and trying to get things that are closer to life as we know it and life-like structures out of those things. So one really famous example is something called the Miller-Urey experiment. And this was It was in the second half of the 20th century. I don't remember the exact year. But basically what they did was they had like this big kind of pot of all of the materials they thought they would be there. And then they had some sort of like electric shock that was given to it that was made to simulate lightning. And they actually found from that they were getting some of those building blocks of life. And so that's like the classic example, but it also has some problems. Some of the conditions that they actually were simulating there, we now know that we actually think early Earth had a different thing going on. But that's just one example that a lot of studies kind of followed. A more recent example is something that came out, I think, in January of this year. And it was talking about something called the RNA world hypothesis. So DNA is in all living things, and it is like kind of what carries the genetic code of what different life forms will kind of be and what their genome is. And for DNA to become usable, it has to go through transcription and translation, which are just like biochemistry terms that just kind of say the DNA is turned into something called RNA, which is like just similar to DNA, but chemically a little different. And then that gets turned into proteins. And so some people think that life formed from RNA molecules that were kind of synthesized, and then they started to kind of have function. And so this paper that just came out had kind of demonstrated that they had been able to show RNA enzymes or RNA molecules that had like certain biological features to it. But the paper came out, and then of course, like a bunch of scientists had different things to say about it, and everyone's fighting. So it's happening. We're working on it. Yeah. Mhm.
Anybody else wanna?
Life as we know it is really, really complicated. And it seems like all of the pieces should be able to come together on their own. But we haven't seen that happen. And it really challenges us to ask, well, what is it about the condition we find ourselves in that is so interesting that we want to find it elsewhere? And honestly, I don't think it's actually the same thing for everybody, and that's part of the problem. And so those of us who are looking for someone to talk to, those of us who are looking for replication, those of us who are looking for metabolism, we're looking for slightly different things. And hopefully that's an opportunity for us to learn a bunch of interesting stuff. But it's also sort of a trap when we get caught into arguing about what it is that is instead of what it is that we're interested in. Because there's a whole lot that we're interested in that we are finding.
All right, I want to give each of you an opportunity to say one last thing to the audience as we wrap up this evening. And again, I want to thank you. Y'all are this honest folks, 3 months ago, this started out as a conversation in her office with her and I trying to figure out what we were going to do to keep the legacy of Pastor James alive with the Science Fest. And my God, what were we going to talk about? And honest, I said, well, can't we talk about the continuum from Star Trek, right? And so here we are. So, folks, uh, wrap it up. Go ahead, sources.
I just appreciate all of you all and your interest. I would just say that life is sacred wherever we find it. And since we found it here, let's treat each other as sacred.
Amen.
Yeah, just wanted to thank everyone for being here tonight. And I guess in terms of closing thoughts, life is sacred and it is complicated and it can look like a lot of different things. So it's cool to kind of explore all of this evening.
I will echo my colleagues and friends and say thank you so much for being here. Before we started, my husband was like, "Is anyone going to come to this thing?" And I was like, "I don't know. We'll see." So it has been so nice to be here and talk with all of you and all of you about this. This has really developed into something so much more meaningful and interesting than I could ever have imagined. So I really appreciate everyone being willing to entertain this notion and talk with us tonight.
It's been an honor and a joy. Thank you so much to everyone. I'm going to end with the question, who is my neighbor? And my hope that all of us have a slightly broader concept of neighbor after this discussion than we did before.
Amen.
I don't think that there's any better way to end the evening. Who is my neighbor? Thank you for coming.
Oh, my computer